The relentless training of Easy Company at Currahee under a demanding command reflects the intense preparation that preceded the recent offensive. The total coordination between American and Israeli forces to execute an operation of such complexity required a level of discipline and meticulous planning. Every unit, every pilot, and every intelligence analyst operated under immense pressure, aware that the slightest failure could have catastrophic consequences, not unlike the soldiers whose success depended on the perfection of their exhaustively drilled maneuvers. This preparatory phase, largely invisible to the public, is where the mission's cohesion was forged. Just as the men of Easy united against the adversities imposed by Captain Sobel to become an elite unit, the military alliance for this specific operation solidified around a singular, high-stakes objective. Doctrine, technology, and strategy were aligned to ensure that when the order was given, the execution would be precise and devastating, a testament to rigorous preparation. The leadership of Donald Trump, with his assertive command style and demands for definitive results, can be seen as the catalyst that imposed the necessary discipline for such a bold action. The pressure for a spectacular military feat left no room for error, mirroring the high-pressure atmosphere of Currahee. The operation's success with the B-2 bombers and GBU-57 bunker buster bombs was the culmination of this intense preparatory phase where confidence in capabilities and equipment was built long before the actual combat. The paratrooper drop over Normandy on D-Day was marked by chaos, with soldiers scattered and separated from their units, forced to improvise to achieve their objectives. This scenario finds a parallel in the immediate aftermath of the U.S. airstrikes. The attack itself was precise, but it unleashed global diplomatic and strategic chaos. Nations found themselves scattered in their responses, alliances were tested, and the front line instantly became diffuse, extending from the physical battlefield to the arena of information and the world economy. The concept of a clear battlefront dissolved, replaced by a hybrid war. Just as the paratroopers had to navigate hostile and unknown territory to regroup, world leaders now navigate a fractured geopolitical landscape. The Iranian retaliations, international condemnations, and threats of a wider escalation represent the ambushes and sporadic firefights of this new phase of the conflict, where the adversary's next move is dangerously unpredictable. In this chaotic environment, the strategic objective remains, but the path to achieving it becomes uncertain. The initial U.S. plan to disable the nuclear program was executed, but like the taking of an artillery battery in Day of Days, this tactical victory has opened a new chapter of strategic uncertainties. Iran's response, declaring all American military personnel in the region as targets, effectively expanded the battlefield, making the terrain far more dangerous and complex than before the initial strike. The episode Corentin explores the heavy, psychological burden of urban combat and the shock of violence on soldiers and civilians alike. The exchange of missiles between Iran and Israel directly reflects this trauma in the current scenario. For the civilian populations on both sides, the sudden eruption of sirens, explosions, and the loss of innocent lives is a form of shock and terror. This experience of being caught in the crossfire of a war fought with long-range weapons mirrors the indiscriminate horror of the urban battle depicted in the series. Private Blythe, paralyzed by fear and shock in Corentin, symbolizes human vulnerability amidst the brutality of war. Likewise, civilians in the region are exposed to a trauma they did not choose. Living under the constant threat of violence that seems to come from nowhere and can strike anyone. The news of civilian casualties in Israel due to Iranian missiles transforms the strategic conflict into a human tragedy, showing the real cost of decisions made by distant leaders. Modern warfare, even when focused on strategic targets, is rarely surgical in its human impact. Fear and anxiety infiltrate daily life, creating a form of psychological paralysis in society. This is the reality for those living under the trajectory of missiles, a grim reminder that, just as in Corentin, the distinction between combatant and non-combatant can become tragically irrelevant when combat erupts in the streets and skies above their homes. In Replacements, the arrival of new, inexperienced soldiers highlights the harsh reality of sustaining a military campaign. In the current conflict, the introduction of B-2 bombers and GBU-57 bunker buster BOMBS can be seen as the arrival of highly specialized and lethal replacements. These are not men, but advanced weapon systems, brought in to perform a specific task that previous tools could not, to penetrate and destroy Iran's most fortified targets, fundamentally altering the dynamics of the confrontation. The integration of these new assets, however, also creates new vulnerabilities. Iran's declaration that all U.S. military personnel in the region are now legitimate targets effectively turns every American base and every soldier into a replacement on the front line. Personnel who previously served in support or deterrence roles have been suddenly thrust into a state of direct combat, facing an elevated and immediate risk similar to the new recruits who were pushed to the front lines in Europe. This development reflects the relentless nature of escalation. A show of force with new capabilities provokes a response that expands the scope of potential targets. Advanced technology, the modern replacement, does not offer invulnerability. Instead, it raises the stakes, ensuring that the adversary will adapt its tactics to strike wherever it can find a weakness, turning the entire region into a much more dangerous combat zone for everyone involved. Lieutenant Winter's brilliant tactical assault at a Dutch crossroads, executed with a small force against a superior enemy contingent, is a case study in precision and leadership. The recent U.S. operation against Iran's nuclear facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan can be analyzed as a modern version of this maneuver. It was a focused and surgical action designed to achieve a singular, high-value strategic objective, the neutralization of nuclear capability with concentrated force rather than a full-scale invasion. The decision to use stealth bombers and specialized munitions demonstrates meticulous planning aimed at maximizing damage to the target while, theoretically, minimizing the need for a prolonged ground conflict. This approach mirrors Winter's philosophy in the attack: use intelligence, surprise, and superior firepower at a critical point to unbalance the enemy. The action was a calculated display of power designed to cripple a specific aspect of the adversary's capability with a single, decisive blow. However, just as Winter's victory was only a moment in a long war, this tactical strike does not end the conflict. It represents a critical crossroads that alters the course of the war, forcing a reaction from the enemy and setting a new, dangerous precedent. The effectiveness of the maneuver in achieving its short-term goal is clear, but its long-term strategic consequences, including the inevitable Iranian response and regional instability, remain an open and perilous question. Easy Company's siege in Bastogne, facing the cold, starvation, and an overwhelming enemy, is a story of resistance against all odds. Today, Iran can be seen in a position analogous to a strategic and technological siege. The direct U.S. attack from a militarily superior force aimed to paralyze its most vital capability. The country now finds itself diplomatically isolated by many Western powers and under an assault that has severely tested its defenses, a modern Bastogne. Iran's response, vowing retaliation and resistance, echoes the defiant resolve of the soldiers in Bastogne, who replied to the demand for surrender with the famous retort, "Nuts." Despite significant damage to its nuclear program, the Iranian leadership projects an image of defiance, not capitulation. They are digging in rhetorically and strategically, preparing for a prolonged, asymmetric conflict, refusing to bow to the overwhelming pressure exerted by their adversaries. This stance of holding the line defines the current phase for Tehran. They are enduring the initial shock of the hardest blow they have ever received and must now formulate a counteroffensive from a position of material disadvantage. Just as in Bastogne, the battle becomes a test of will and resilience. Iran's ability to withstand this siege and retaliate effectively will determine the next phase of the conflict, proving that the destruction of targets does not necessarily break the will to fight. The breaking point depicts the horror of the battle in the woods of Foy, where men reach their physical and mental limits and leadership fails under pressure. The U.S. decision to directly attack Iranian territory can be seen as the breaking point for Middle Eastern stability. The previous doctrine of proxy wars and containment has been shattered. This act broke the unwritten rules of engagement between the U.S. and Iran, pushing the region past a dangerous threshold and into the unknown territory of direct confrontation. The failure of leadership, represented by Lieutenant Dyke in Foy, can be compared to the paralysis of international diplomacy, such as the freezing of the UN Security Council. The structures that were designed to prevent or manage such escalations proved ineffective, leaving a vacuum of authority at the most critical moment. This breakdown in the international order allowed the situation to deteriorate rapidly, leading to a direct confrontation that many feared but few could prevent. This moment represents the collapse of the old paradigm. The escalation from a shadow conflict to an open confrontation is the point at which the psychology of all actors changes. The fear of all-out war, once a deterrent, now becomes an imminent possibility. The region has reached its breaking point, and the consequences, like the carnage in Foy, are unpredictable and likely to be terrible, marking a new and much bloodier phase of the conflict. Near the end of the war in Europe, the order to send men on a dangerous and pointless last patrol in the last patrol breeds resentment and questions about the purpose of Command S orders. Donald Trump's current posture, which simultaneously threatens annihilation and offers negotiations, creates a similar strategic confusion. The actions seem contradictory. A devastating attack followed by an invitation to dialogue sounds like a mission with conflicting objectives, casting doubt on the clarity of the ultimate strategy. Regional and global actors, much like the soldiers of Easy Company, are forced to question the endgame. Is the purpose the complete destruction of the Iranian regime or to force it into a new negotiation? This strategic ambiguity is dangerous. It can lead to miscalculations, with Iran potentially interpreting the offer of dialogue as weakness or the threat of attack as a bluff, mirroring the soldiers' distrust of a command that seemed to be risking their lives needlessly. This duality in American policy creates a sense of uncertainty and peril. The mission is not clear. Is it a show of force to secure peace or the prelude to an even greater war? Just as the veterans of Easy resented risking everything when the end was in sight, international observers worry that these high-stakes maneuvers without a coherent and communicable final objective could trigger a catastrophe that might have been avoided with clearer, more consistent command. The discovery of a concentration camp in Why We Fight confronts the soldiers with the ultimate, unequivocal reason for their struggle, transcending mere survival and combat. The Trump administration has framed the attack on Iran similarly, presenting it as a necessary action to prevent a greater evil, a nuclear-armed Iran. The justification of preventing a nuclear holocaust serves as the central moral argument, the why we fight of this new era of conflict. This narrative aims to provide moral clarity to an aggressive military action that would otherwise be widely condemned as a violation of sovereignty. It is an attempt to occupy the moral high ground by arguing that inaction would have far more terrible consequences. Just as the sight of the concentration camp hardened the soldiers' resolve, The rhetoric about preventing nuclear proliferation is meant to solidify domestic and international support for the policy of direct confrontation. However, unlike the undeniable discovery at Landsberg, this justification is an argument about the future, not an accomplished fact. It forces the world to confront a difficult choice: accept a preemptive war today to prevent a potential catastrophe tomorrow. For proponents of Trump's policy, the attack was a moral responsibility. For opponents, it is a dangerous gamble based on projections, but in either case, the narrative is firmly planted on the ground of fighting to prevent a greater evil. The final episode, Points, deals with the end of the war but not the end of problems, focusing on the uncertainty of occupation and the difficult return to normal life. The current scenario, following the U.S. attacks, reflects this transition into an uncertain and dangerous post-war period. If the immediate military objective of destroying nuclear facilities has been achieved, the lingering question is, what now? The occupation that follows is not of territory, but of a power vacuum and a radically altered strategic landscape. The world has entered the day-after phase, having to deal with the consequences of military action. This includes managing diplomatic fallout, containing the inevitable long-term Iranian retaliation, the risk of proliferating proxy conflicts, and global economic instability. Just as the soldiers of Easy had to police a defeated nation and deal with local lawlessness, the international community now faces the task of managing a deeply destabilized region. There is no clear return to normalcy because normalcy has been destroyed. The end of active hostilities will only be the beginning of a long and complicated process of establishing a new order. The uncertainty about Iran's future, the balance of power in the Middle East, and the rules of engagement between world powers is the defining challenge of this new era. An echo of the sense of disorientation and lost purpose that the men of Easy Company felt when the guns finally fell silent.